Have you ever heard someone say, don't go on Medicaid because they'll take your home? Well, that was one of the most common fears that I would hear when speaking with clients about long-term care planning. And the truth is, that answer is not just as simple as a yes or no. Hi, welcome to Your Money Always Matters. My name is Ladia, and I am a retired licensed financial professional with over 40 years in the financial services industry. And here's something that most people don't see. When a brokerage firm receives a Medicaid asset verification form, we just don't automatically release the information. A call would be made to the client to confirm that they actually authorized the release of that information. Now, that was great customer service, but more importantly, it was also a part of our account security procedures. And so once the client realized why I was calling, the next thing it would go into the questions from the asset verification form to Medicaid. And that's when the questions started. Are they going to take my home? Will I lose all of my savings? And to be honest about it, when my mother was looking for long-term care with Medicaid, those were some of the same fears that my family and I had. And that is why I have researched this topic through federal resources and state resources so I can bring you some educational information about long-term care and Medicaid. And with all of that out of the way, let's dive into what is Medicaid. First, it's important to understand which Medicaid we're talking about. Many people think of Medicaid as health insurance, and that's true. However, the concern that comes over losing your home is usually from the long-term care of Medicaid. That's the program that pays for long-term care nursing home, certain in-home long-term care, and certain community-based long-term care programs. And with the cost of long-term coverage being so much, eventually people turn to Medicaid for assistance. So does Medicaid take your home while you're alive? Well, generally no. If your home is your primary residence and you meet the program's requirements, your home is often considered an exempt asset when it comes to Medicaid eligibility. And that surprises a lot of people. Many people think that they have to sell their home before they can qualify for Medicaid. Just know that each state administers its program differently. So, of course, having state-specific guidance in this case is also very important. So, where did this myth come from? Well, generally, the confusion comes from something called Medicaid Estate Recovery. Now, notice those words carefully. Medicaid Estate Recovery, not home recovery. After a person that has received certain long-term care benefits from Medicaid passes away, then federal law requires the state to seek reimbursements for those payments. In other words, if a person has received long-term care benefits and nursing home was paid during that time and they pass away, the state may seek to recover all or some of the costs from your estate after you pass. And your estate may include your home, but that's very different from Medicaid taking your home while you're still alive. Here's an example for you. Let's say Mary owns a home and eventually needs nursing care. She qualifies for Medicaid and Medicaid pays for her long-term care. Mary continues to own her home. Years later, after Mary passes away, her estate includes that home. And so in this case, depending upon Indiana law, how the property is titled, whether there are any exemptions or exceptions that apply, as well as other legal factors, the state may seek to recover the costs that were paid to Mary. That does not automatically mean that the house has to be sold, but it does mean that it does need to be addressed as part of the estate administration. Here are some important exceptions. There are certain situations in which estate recovery is delayed or may not occur immediately. For example, recovery is generally postponed if there is a surviving spouse. There are also protections involving certain minor children and children who are blind or permanently disabled. Some states also have hardship waivers that can apply in specific circumstances. That's why it's impossible to answer every question with a simple yes or no, because every family situation is different. What about trust? Well, since I've been doing several videos on trust, that question naturally comes up. Having a revocable trust is an excellent estate planning tool, and it also eases in the estate administration. However, putting the assets into a revocable living trust does not shield you from Medicaid eligibility, because generally you continue to control those assets that are in a revocable living trust and therefore come under scrutiny when it comes to Medicaid eligibility. An irrevocable trust is different. Certain irrevocable trusts can be used as part of Medicaid estate planning. However, transfers into those trusts can trigger Medicaid's 5-year look-back period if those assets are not transferred far enough in advance. And that's why Medicaid planning is part of a conversation long before those benefits are actually needed. The 5-year look-back period is another topic that many people misunderstand. When someone applies for Medicaid long-term care benefits, the state is required to review financial transactions made within the previous 60 months for that individual. If it is determined that assets were sold or transferred for less than their fair market value during that period, that could trigger a penalty period for eligibility. The key point is the look back period does not mean Medicaid will take your home. It actually means they will determine if you try to pretty much get rid of those assets in order to qualify for Medicaid. The biggest lesson from all of this is that planning early creates options. Waiting until someone has to enter a nursing home greatly limits the options that are available. So, whether it's looking at your beneficiary designations, learning how trust works, talking with a professional for estate planning for Medicaid, all of those things go into planning and being prepared before the need actually arises. So, does Medicaid take your home? Well, not exactly. In many situations, your home becomes an exempt asset while you're still alive. It really comes in with Medicaid's estate recovery process. And that's where, at your passing, the state looks to recover the cost, all or most of the cost, from your estate for paying out those long term care benefits for Medicaid. And that's a very different concept than the myth of Medicaid just taking your home. As always, my goal is to help you better understand these financial and estate planning topics so you can ask informed questions and make educated decisions. And if you found this video to be helpful, please subscribe to my channel and share with your family and friends. Because in my next video, I am going to talk about Medicaid's 5-year look-back period and go into a little bit more detail about that. Thank you for joining me again, because your money always matters.